Hi, and welcome to the history lessons in Wikipedia World. The lesson that we're going to start today is the first one on Guernica, trying to explain and see a bit on the horrors that occurred during the Spanish Civil War. We'll see its importance and how it also affected Europe. To have an overview of what we're going to be seeing in this lesson, we start in 1936 and up to 1939 Europe. This is the time of the Spanish Civil War. We're going to Spain on one historical event that will be putting in context and analyzing what happened to understand better that time period. This time we'll be talking about the attack on the Basque town of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. Before going into the event, in this lesson, this first lesson, we will get an overview for the necessary context on what was happening in the region and the world at that time, as the Civil War was rising. This was just before the Second World War. This is why it's so important. Here we'll also see many of the relations between nations that were being set. It actually served as a trial for what was to come. Here is an example where fights against fascism in Europe started. It showed how the world was already dividing itself in factions and growing in instability. The pieces of the chessboard that would later become the fighting during the Second World War was starting to move, and due to the building of unrest that was already there between the countries and the rising opposite ideologies. On one side we had mainly communism and socialism on the left wing, and then we have the conservative extreme right rising with fascism. They will collide first in this part of Southern Europe the most violent way. This happened due not only to these ideologies, obviously. There was their own particular conflicts and unresolved issues in the country. This comes from way behind in other conflicts that the country had already been through and had been building up to this moment. What we'll see is the uprising, what happened to spark this civil war. We'll look at the countries that took sides for both and the aftermath. How did this civil war end? Starting with the uprising. Well, this war began after a pronunciamiento. A pronunciamiento is a coup, a military coup that was perpetrated by the Spanish generals of the armed forces. Originally, it started with the leadership of the General José Sanjurjo, and when he died in an accident, the leadership went to the General Francisco Franco, that he would then be the figure and the leader of the movement and the national faction of the war. So we have a group of generals that do a
military coup that have various uprisings in very different places. The coup was supported by military units in Morocco, Pamplona, Burgos, Zaragoza, Valladolid, Cádiz, Córdoba and Seville. But, however, these rebels also tried the objectives in Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, Bilbao, Malaga, but there they were unable to capture the cities. So the military that was left supporting the democratically elected government of the Second Spanish Republic was backing them off. And here we did have quite a level of difference in military skills, but they resisted, and here the war started. It is of great importance for the world, especially the intellectual world, intellectuals, religious leaders, even labor unions. The opinions were divided. You had the right and the Catholics that supported the Nationalists, because for them it was a way to stop Bolshevism and communism. On the left, you had labor unions, students, intellectuals, that for them the war represented a necessary battle to stop the spread of fascism. Anti-war and sentiment was strong in many countries, and this civil war for many had the potential of escalating into what then would be the Second World War. That said, but Spanish Civil War already had its own peculiarities. It was not the reason that the Second World War came to happen. That said, because of these fears, the League of Nations, instead of giving help to a democratically elected government, they decided to sign an official policy of non-intervention with the United Kingdom, France backing them. This non-intervention pact, though, as we'll see, had little weight for some countries that had the interests in mind to actually back one side or another. But who were the sides? The nationalists, sorry. Well, as we mentioned before, we had José Sanjurjo as a leader, and then General Francisco Franco. Nationalists is actually a term that was first used by Joseph Goebbels when he came in an unofficial visit to Spain. These were the most right conservative groups, more to just extremely right groups. We had the SEDA, the Spanish Confederation of Autonomous Right-Wing Groups. The monarchists also supported the nationalist uprising. Obviously, as what there was before was a republic. This was a second republic in Spain that was very, very difficult to achieve. But monarchists were obviously not happy about that. One of the other big supporters of the nationalists was the religious conservative sector of the country. Even they were supported by the Vatican, because one of the groups that the Republicans did target was Catholic groups and religious institutions. Religious institutions with the Republic had lost their importance, especially in education, and the country was leaving its religious background to just the private sphere instead of the previous power and influence that the church had had in the country. This obviously did not go down very well, and at the chance that they saw to regain that influence and power, they supported the nationalists in their uprising against the government. And then there was various fascist groups that were obviously subscribing to the ideas that the military uprising had. There was two, the Falange and the Jons in Spanish. The Republican side was obviously backed by the elected democratically the government of the Second Republic. They had the support of the people, and they were what it's been called a loyalist faction, more left-wing. The president at the time was Manuel Azaña, and they were called the Reds by especially the nationalist group because they associated them with communism and socialism, although as left-wing ideology goes, they were pretty varied. You had communists, yes, you had socialists, but there was also many anarchist movements. There was quite a conglomeration of ideologies and political groups. As we see, you also had the political groups Popular Front and the nationalist Catalan and Basque parties. Catalonia and the Basque Country are two regions in Spain that are different nations. They speak different languages and have a different culture, and they've always had nationalist groups to defend their identity. They adscribed to the the Second Republic government. Then you also had many unions. The unions at the time in Spain were the CNT, the FAI, and the UGT. That they were fighting for the freedom and the rights of the workers as it was happening at the time. They were at the first movements, at the really avant-garde of politics at Europe at that moment. Then, as we'll see, things will go really wrong. Well, we did mention before that every one of the factions, of the two factions, had support from abroad. The support that the nationalists received was from obviously also other fascist groups, other fascist countries and governments. A total of 16,000 German citizens fought in the war, and even it's calculated around 300 were killed. The amount of money that was sent as aid from the Nazi Germany government, the government in Nazi Germany, Hitler's government, was really high. We're talking about $215 million dollars in financial aid. Hitler sent air and armored units that were specific for the interventions in Spain. The Conde Legion, we'll be talking about this one again. Let's not forget about this name. We also know that Germany provided the Nationalists with 600 planes and 200 tanks. The German involvement basically began days after the fighting broke in July. Adolf Hitler quickly sent powerful aid to assist the Nationalists. It is plausible that Hitler would have done more, but the risk of too much involvement was not at his interest, because obviously fighting in a foreign war has its risks, but seeing how everything was playing around Europe at that time, you did not want to put all your support on one side, and especially not leaving out that they were preparing for a larger conflict. So what Hitler did was tell Mussolini, or advise, we could say, Mussolini, at that time the other fascist government. He was encouraged by Hitler to join the war and help Spain. The Royal Italian Navy played a substantial role in the blockade in the Mediterranean Sea. Italy also supplied with a lot of material: machine guns, artillery, aircraft, tankettes, warships, and even 5,000 men. The Italian warships took part in breaking the Republican Navy's blockade at the Nationalist-held Spanish part of Morocco, and even took part in various bombardments of Malaga, Valencia, Barcelona, and what we're going to be talking about in Guernica. In total, Italy provided Nationalists with 660 planes, 150 tanks, 800 artillery pieces, 10,000 machine guns, and 240,000 rifles. This was not just a little bit of help. Many of this we've known afterwards. Lots of help to both sides was also conveyed, because most countries did sign the non-intervention pact, but they didn't follow with it. Another one that normally people don't talk about: Italy and Germany are obvious allies for fascist uprising in Spain. But Portugal had this semi-official, let's say, help on the national side in Spain. Basically, they did help with organization skills. They didn't help with financial aid or with men or weapons. But there was something much, much more valuable. If you have Portugal in your head, it's in the Iberian Peninsula, sharing all the space in this part of the world with Spain. It's a neighbouring country with whom they share all their borders. Portugal assured that there wouldn't be a threat to the nationalists and they would not interfere. And that would give you really a quietness of mind that you don't have to worry about your back or all that side of the peninsula, that if they change their mind, they can come in and help the Republicans at any time. But they did not. They backed with the nationalists. This was the support that the military uprising had. Who supported the Republicans? Well, the Republicans had, firstly, and I think as a personal opinion, that it's invaluable and has to be remembered and mentioned, the international brigades. We're talking about 40,000 people from 53 different countries. French, German, Austrian, Italian, from the Soviet Union, United States, United Kingdom, Poland, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Canada, people from all over the world that were often affiliated with communism or socialism entities came with the international brigades. The belief behind this was that the Spanish Republic was the front line against fascism, and the units represented a really large foreign contingent and help to the Republican Army. Up to 53 different countries, and you've seen France, Germany, United Kingdom. These were countries that would obviously ban people going to the Spanish War, but the people still did that. The people at that moment who came into the international brigades, they came fighting for the ideology, wanting to be next to that government, democratically elected, that was being put down by fascism that was uprising also in the rest of Europe. As we've said, there was prohibitions from their own governments, but they ignored it and they went to fight at war for what they thought and believed was the right thing to do. And many, many died, shed their blood in a foreign country that they did not know that much about, but to fight for human rights. The other obvious helper of the Spanish Second Republic was the Soviet Union. Although Joseph Stalin had signed the non-intervention agreement, they just contravened the League of Nations embargo and did provide material assistance, and they were the only source of major weapons because no one else in Europe was providing them, different from the nationalists that had Italy and Germany backing. What the Soviets gave to the Republicans has been estimated in 634 planes, 331 tanks, 1,034 artillery pieces, but they were mainly bad quality. They were obsolete and otherwise limited in use. We have to say that the tanks were modern and effective in combat, but also the process of shipping arms from Russia to Spain was extremely slow. Many shipments were lost or arrived only partially matching what had been authorized. What Stalin had done was include false decks in original designs of ships, so you could be deceptive with the Soviet captains to evade the detection by the nationalists. This, though, was not just Lent. The Republic did pay Soviet arms with the official Bank of Spain's gold reserves. Then we move to the last helper of the Second Republic government. This, Mexico, is the only country that refused the non-intervention proposal, and they backed the Spanish government. Mexico furnished with material aid, with financial aid, and also with diplomatic help. We see that the aid was high, especially for a country like Mexico at the other side of the world. $2 million in aid, 20,000 rifles, 20 million cartridges, and the diplomatic help that was needed. Also, they provided a sanctuary for the Republican refugees. Here is where more than 50,000 Republican refugees fled to. Many intellectuals, large numbers of orphan children from Republican families took refuge there. And we have to mention, yes, Mexico was the only government that said, no, we need to help them. Having put the two sides, let's see briefly how the war ended. Well, the nationalists advanced from their strongholds, and from the south and the west ended up capturing most of Spain's northern coastline in 1937. Let's remember the difference between the help they were receiving from the sources. Once the nationalists had Germany and Italy backing them with high financial and weapon support, being at the top league of military advancements at that time, while the non-intervention pact meant that no one else was going to be helping the Republican government that had what was left of those military groups that did not uprise with the rest of the army, and some help from the Soviet Union, Mexico at the other side of the world, and that was it. So you really had groups of many untrained people on the side of the Republicans, plus quite a professional army at the side of the nationalists. So they also then besieged Madrid, the capital, and went up advancing from south to west for most of the war. Large parts of Catalonia were the last battles in 38 and 39, ending with the victory of the nationalists, sending to exile thousands of Spaniards that had been backing the Republic into France. Those that were associated with the losing Republican side were highly persecuted during the dictatorship by General Francisco Franco that lasted until 1975, where he died in his deathbed, quietly in his house. During his time in power, during his dictatorship, persecutions and purges of Republicans and their families were common. Many death sentences were issued to clear out the bad blood and everyone who might oppose the dictatorship. This is how Spain ended before the Second World War, and how it continued even after. Just want to end with a quote from Juan Negrin, one of the presidents of the Second Republic, Spanish Second Republic. In Spanish it says, "Fue en España donde los hombres aprendieron que es posible tener razón y aún así sufrir la derrota." In English it says, "It was in Spain where men learned that it's possible to be right and even then suffer defeat." Here you had an overview of the situation, and we'll continue in the next lessons. I hope you enjoyed this one, and see you.